Canada has been the ultimate dream destination for many. It's safe, stable, prosperous, and offers top-notch services. No wonder it's always at the top of everyone's moving wish list. But not everything is as it seems. The truth, as many Canadians will tell you, is quite different. 2/3 of Canadians believe that everything in the country is broken and has a terrible quality of life. So join us as we dive into what's behind Canadians' widespread dissatisfaction with their country and its current state. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing for more content like this. Let's start with the growing crisis. Canada's growth has been disappointingly weak for the past decade, resulting in the smallest per capita GDP gain in almost a century. Moreover, according to the OECD report 2021, Canada is projected to be the worst-performing advanced economy in the coming decades. The OECD predicts Canada can at best achieve real per capita GDP growth of only 0.7% per year over 2020 to 2030. In the early 1980s, Canada's GDP per capita was almost identical to that of the United States. Since then, Canada has fallen further and further behind, and the gap today stands at approximately 30%. International trade is a large component of Canada's economy, and Canada sends about 77% of its exports to the United States. Canada's economy is flirting with recession and could get even worse because the fast growth that was happening in the United States is expected to end. According to established economic wisdom, when the US sniffles, Canada tends to catch a cold, says Carl Shamotta, chief market strategist at Corpay. But with the world so reliant on American consumer demand and the Canadian private sector carrying exorbitantly high debt levels, if the US sniffles, Canada is going to get pneumonia. In terms of GDP, the country's economy lags behind the United States, hinting that the root of Canada's growth problem lies within its borders. This can be traced back to the year 2014, when the oil price collapse significantly affected real business investment and exports in Canada, the key indicators of innovation and competitiveness in Canadian businesses. Most Canadian government policies provide at best a one-time boost to income when sustained economic growth requires a culture that relentlessly drives innovation year after year. Additionally, Canada lacks a business culture, which drives economic growth. Even the best policies and institutions can't make up for a lack of entrepreneurship and innovation. Free trade deals don't ensure export competitiveness if a country's culture does not support innovation and entrepreneurship. The widespread respect for innovators and entrepreneurs in Canada is more needed than government subsidies. To make matters worse, inflation has made the lives of Canadians even harder. High inflation is wreaking havoc on people's lives. The COVID-19 pandemic and its resulting supply chain issues have caused essential items like food, gas, and housing to become more expensive. The Bank of Canada took action against high inflation by boosting its interest rate from a mere 0.25% to a whopping 5% in just over a year, and made moves to shrink its balance sheet by stopping bond purchases and implementing quantitative tightening. These actions have successfully tamed inflation, dropping it from 8.1% in June 2022 to 3.1% in October 2023. The bank predicts inflation will stay above 2% until 2024, so they're keeping the policy rate steady until mid-2024. Now, these policies did help, but the growth rate took a hit in the second quarter of 2023 due to higher interest rates. Rising borrowing costs have made people more careful with their money, leading to less spending on things like cars, homes, and vacations. And according to Pierre Poilievre, the cause of this inflation is simple. The Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, blames Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for the recent increase in the Bank of Canada's interest rate, attributing it to government spending causing inflation. This rise impacts homeowners, consumers, and businesses, leading to higher costs. Poilievre asserts that Trudeau's tenure has resulted in a higher cost of living. Despite Trudeau's reassurances about interest rates, his policies have impacted families with debt. While Trudeau and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland claim that it's largely because of COVID and the Ukraine conflict. But that doesn't change the fact that Canada's economy has taken a big hit because of it. But the economic problems don't end there. One of the biggest problems Canada faces today is the ongoing housing crisis. If you think the US housing crisis is bad, wait till you hear about their neighbor Canada. Home values in Canada have skyrocketed, doubling since 2011, driving the country towards a recession. But what drove the crisis? It's simple: supply couldn't keep up with demand. Canada needs more housing, but city governments tend to favor homeowners over renters when it comes to housing policy. This bias leads to policies that restrict home building and maintain high home values. Money flowing into the real estate market isn't doing any favors either, as record population growth from immigration has fueled the demand even further. The US has been facing a housing affordability crisis due to a shortage of homes, increased interest rates, and investor speculation for a while now. And in Canada, it's similar but worse, says Mike Moffat. And increased interest rates by Canada to control inflation made mortgage financing more expensive. At this point, it's not a secret that Canadians are drowning in debt, partly because of their economic crises. Canada holds the record for the highest household debt among G7 nations, with a whopping 75% coming from mortgages. This housing crisis is a direct consequence of long-standing terrible policies. In the 1980s, the federal government handed over the responsibility to the provinces, setting the stage for the current predicament. Sheila Copps, a former Liberal deputy prime minister, reveals that housing policy in the 1970s involved the national government taking a hands-on approach to building housing, including homes for seniors and Indigenous communities. But when the provincial governments took charge, only a few stepped up to fund social housing. Many haven't. Not only is this a major problem, but it's also giving rise to another huge economic disaster: reverse migration. From being the dreamland of many, Canada's slowly becoming a nightmare for immigrants, with many considering leaving the country they once called home. Trudeau has been using immigration as a powerful tool to tackle Canada's aging population and boost economic growth. Canada's population surged at its fastest pace in over 6 decades this year. But now a surprising twist is slowly gaining momentum. A whopping 42,000 individuals bid farewell to Canada in the first half of 2023. This adds to the 93,818 people who left in 2022 and the 85,927 who exited in 2021. According to the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, an immigration advocacy group, the number of immigrants leaving Canada reached a 2-decade high in 2019. Numbers plummeted during pandemic lockdowns, but now they're on the rise again. While it's only a fraction of the 263,000 who arrived in the country during the same time, the increasing emigration rate has caught the attention of some observers. Emigration from Canada reached its peak in the mid-1990s, with 0.2% of the population leaving the country. Today, emigration stands at approximately 0.09%. According to the people leaving the country, rising housing costs were the biggest contributor to their decision. And did you know that in Canada, it takes about 60% of household income to cover home ownership cost? But wait, in Vancouver, that number jumps up to a whopping 98%, and in Toronto it's around 80%, which hurts the citizens even more. And with the ongoing terrible housing policies, it's gotten even harder for immigrants to survive, let alone live in Canada. This shows how much Canada has fallen behind in terms of standards of living. Canada's headline growth has been impressive in recent years, but it still fell short compared to the US and other advanced economies when it comes to the standard of living. New data from the non-profit Angus Reid Institute finds that about 53% of Canadians say they can't afford to live in Canada. Blaming Canada's growing population for its low per capita performance may be tempting, as it has affected the calculation. The real issue is the lack of growth in the numerator, real GDP, which is connected to ongoing productivity problems. Commodity-based economies in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador used to dominate per capita GDP levels, but their leadership is now being challenged. After the pandemic, only British Columbia and PEI have successfully bounced back to their pre-2019 GDP per capita levels, while the rest are still struggling to stabilize. The worst part is that Canada's standard of living has been on a downward spiral for years, and things have only gotten worse since the pandemic hit. The economy's lackluster productivity growth is the main culprit behind its insufficient output per hour of work. Productivity growth depends on innovation, investment, education, skills, infrastructure, and competitiveness. Still, Canadians' living standards show little sign of improvement, but the economy's been shrinking for 3 quarters straight, and it looks like it's going to keep shrinking until 2024. Now the question is Canada falling into a mild recession? In a nutshell, a recession is like a temporary slump in the economy and is a normal part of the ups and downs of the business world. A recession happens when the economy shrinks for 6 months in a row. With everything going around, it looks like Canada might be on the verge of one. Inflation is on the rise, eating away at purchasing power and making everything more expensive. Higher interest rates are also making it harder to borrow and spend money on things like cars, homes, and even essential products. Not to mention the labor shortages are causing a worker supply squeeze and pushing wages higher. Supply chain disruptions are causing costs to skyrocket for essential goods and services like gas, food, and shelter, hitting Canadian citizens' wallets hard. A mild recession is like a passing breeze, not too harsh or long-lasting, and it doesn't leave a trail of destruction in its wake. But still, it's not something you take lightly either. Re-establishing Canada's place on the global stage requires not empty slogans like Canada is back, but creating an environment in which world-class companies thrive. Canada needs to create a culture that rewards innovation and entrepreneurship. Spending on social programs doesn't attract business investment or help compete globally. Canadians are becoming what the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche characterized as a people without any ideals or aspirations, but well-fed, well-clothed, well-housed, and well-medicated. This is a recipe for the economic stagnation that plagues Italy and Japan, not the technological innovation that is driving the US economy forward. So will the Canadian government be able to tackle these issues, or will it permanently lose its reputation as the dream location for immigrants? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.